Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a HTTP API using API Gateway in AWS. We're going to be creating two routes for our API. The first one is called getPerson, and that's going to be a GET API. And the second one is going to be called createPerson, and that's a POST API. These are going to be backed by a single Lambda function, and I'm going to add some conditional logic in this Lambda function so that it can handle both of these different endpoints. So let's head over into the console now and get started with this. All right, everyone. So here we are in the AWS console. So the first step that I want to take you through is creating the HTTP API in the API Gateway section. So let's go to the top here and just click on, or type in rather, API Gateway. Click on the first option. And this is the default landing page. And the first one is our option. So HTTP API, that's what we want to create here. If you don't see this screen, make sure you click on APIs over here on the left, and it should bring you here. So we're going to go ahead and click on the orange button here that says build to launch the first part of the wizard. So the first question that it's asking us is in terms of integration. So what do we want to integrate it with? Could it be an endpoint or a Lambda function or some other kind of service? So we need to click on add integration here. So this drop down here lets us specify what we want to do. So we want to select Lambda for our integration since we're going to create a Lambda function. Now it's asking us for some of the details of that Lambda function. It's asking us for the AWS region that it's located in and the name of that Lambda function. Now we haven't created a Lambda function yet, so we can't really choose one here. So you have two options really. You can create the endpoint first and then add the Lambda function later, or you can kind of take a pause here, go create your Lambda function, and then come back and proceed. So I'm going to take the latter. I'm going to take a pause and go create a very basic Lambda function really quick. So let's go and do that. We're going to right click and duplicate tabs. Now I'm going to go to the search bar and type in Lambda so that we can create our function. And this is the landing screen for the Lambda section. So we're going to go to the top right here and click on create function. And author from scratch is a good option to use here. We're going to leave pretty much everything default. Put in whatever name you want. So mine is just called demo app function. And we are going to be using Python 3.8 here. So make sure you pick Python 3.8. Leave everything else default. The permissions, that's fine. The advanced settings, you don't really need to mess with anything complicated here. And then just go to the bottom right and click on create function. Now, since we left this default, it's going to have to create an IAM role and a couple other things behind the scenes. So that was pretty quick actually. And this is just a very vanilla basic Lambda function. So we're going to do some code editing a little bit later in the console here directly in the editor. So if we click on lambda _ function.py, let me just make this a little bit bigger so everyone could see. This is what is currently in this Lambda function. So it's just a Lambda handler. It's returning 200 OK with hello from Lambda. So this is what we're going to keep for now. So what I want to do now is just go back to API Gateway and complete that process before we start muddying the waters with some more code here. So let's go back to our other tab. And now I think you actually have to refresh the page here because it didn't update. Go ahead and click on this again and click on Lambda functions and then US East 1. And there you go. So now my Lambda function is popping up. Click on that guy and API name now we can pick whatever we want. I think I said our theme is going to be like persons. So I'm just going to call mine persons. And we're going to click on the orange button to go to the next section. Okay, the next section is about routes. So we said that we wanted to create two different routes for this exercise. One was a get for getPerson route, and the other was a post for createPerson route. So we want to change the method here to get. And the resource path is going to be /getPerson. And then the target is going to be what we just integrated with, which is our demo app Lambda function. So we also need to create a second route, which is a post. And that is going to be let me move my mouse there, /createPerson. And as well, that is also going to point to the same Lambda function. Now it's also I just want to point out, it's very reasonable if you wanted to create two different functions, one for each. Nothing wrong with that, but I'm just going to do this in a way such that in my code itself, I'll know whether or not getPerson or createPerson is being invoked so I can respond respectively. So that's all we really need to do here. Click on next. The next step is for stages. So if you want to use a stage that means something, maybe test or beta or production, depending on what you're trying to do, you can go and name it whatever you want or leave it as default. I'm going to leave it as default in my case. The second option I do want to point out is auto deploy. And auto deploy just allows you to say, if I change any settings for this HTTP API, automatically deploy a new version to respect those settings. If you don't like that or you think it's too dangerous, you can disable this, disable that, and then you'll have to manually deploy your API every time. This is more similar to what you have in the REST version of API Gateway, but I kind of like this feature. I think it's neat. I'm going to leave it on and go from there. So let's click on next now to proceed to the review step. So everything looks good. Persons, demo app function, /get person, /create person, and then stages. That looks good. Go ahead and click on create now for the next step. This can take a moment or so just be patient. And it looks like everything succeeded correctly here. So if we just take a look here, so we got our API ID, our API protocol, just some basic details. I want to draw your attention to where it says invoke URL here, because this is going to be the URL that you're going to use to invoke your function. Now, it does look a little bit ugly, and if you want to change this, which most people probably do, I do have a video on that, on how to change the endpoint. You're going to have to interact with Route 53 for that, and I'll leave that in the description section below so you can learn about it as a separate exercise. But for this, if we just want to kind of proceed in our little demo here, I'm just going to right-click and open that in a new tab. So when we do that, we're basically invoking our API Gateway endpoint, right? So right now, we didn't put anything in the path. So there's no mapping right now. So it's just responding with not found. It doesn't know what to do. So if we go to the address bar and just change this to get person, right, which was the first route that I made that uses get. And keep in mind, if you're doing this through your browser and you do it through the browser address bar, it's always a get request. So if we press enter now, we see hello from Lambda. And just recalling back to our tab here for our Lambda function, that's exactly what we're returning back. So it is successfully invoking our Lambda function end-to-end through API Gateway. But of course, this isn't the functionality we want. We want to do some more interesting things. And if I quickly just change this over here to create person, you will see this spectacularly fail because, not found, because I'm trying to call create person API, which is correct, but doing it through the browser means I'm calling it with a get request, but it only supports post. So this isn't going to work, which is why we're getting this not found error here. So in order to address this and make it a little bit easier for us to test, first of all, I'm going to close this tab. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up a tool called Postman. And I have this tab open here with the Postman tool. Now, if you don't know what Postman is, it's just a tool that helps you make service calls or requests to endpoints, and it allows you to configure a whole bunch of options along the way. So what we want to do here with this tool is we want to kind of set ourselves up so that we can test both the get person and the create person API before we actually write our code. So let me go and grab the API Gateway endpoint here, which was right here, and go back to, oops, not that. I want to go back to Postman. There we go. So I'm going to open two tabs here. On the left, this tab here, the one that I'm on right now, is going to be for get person. So we're going to do that /get person. And if I just do this first, I just click on send, you see the same thing happens. It's a get request. So we're still calling that API Gateway endpoint and in turn the Lambda function. But obviously this will change, but I do want to make a change here, and I want to add some parameters. So if I were creating a get person API, the most logical thing that a person would pass into this API is probably something like person ID, right? And let's say that person ID is, person ID 123, person ID 123 in this case. By the way I got to this screen here where I'm adding the payload is just clicking on the params option here. And you can see here, it's actually adding it to the query string parameter. Just wanted to point that out because when we look at the event a little bit later, we're going to have to decompile what is inside that event so that we can extract this value and this key from the body. So clicking send here, nothing really will happen. It's just the same thing as before. In fact, you can click this as many times as you want and still it'll be the same thing. But let's go ahead and set up the other API, which is create person. So let's do the same thing, other tab now. I'm going to change this to post and paste the same thing /create person now. And the same kind of exercise applies. We need to put some data in the body of this request. Since it's a post, we need to put it in the body. So I'm going to click on body over here instead of params. I'm going to change this to raw just so that it's in JSON. So let's say in this, there's probably a million other ways to do this, by the way, so I'm probably doing it wrong. For this, like, what do you want to pass in usually, right? You're creating a person, I don't know, something like first name, right? And then let's call it Daniel. And let's say last name and G. And let's say email. Pretty standard stuff. So my email at gmail.com. Okay. Didn't forget anything, I hope, in terms of commas. Everything looks good there. I'm actually not going to click on send here because we're going to look at the logs for the get API first. So I'm just going to leave this as is for now. But just remember, we're passing in first name, last name, and email to this thing, and it's all camel case. Okay, so go back here. We don't need to invoke this anymore, but I do want to go back to our Lambda function. Now, what I want to do here is just early on, like the goal of our next step is to figure out how do I extract values from my events? Because the values that get passed into the Lambda function from API Gateway, based on what we just did in Postman, are going to be inside this object, the event object. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this out of the way. I'm going to take everything out of the way, and we're just going to do print events. Okay. So anytime someone invokes the API Gateway endpoint, we're going to print out whatever is being passed in. And from there, we should be able to see, person ID 123 somewhere in the event object. And then I'm going to write some conditional logic so that I can extract that out. So let's go and play with this right now. So make sure you click on deploy, by the way, or else this isn't going to work. And I'm going to go back to Postman and just invoke this a couple more times. Now, what you'll see is that the response will change because I'm not returning anything in this Lambda function anymore. If I returned a string or some kind of object, the response will look different. But let's just prove that I'm right here and click on send again. And you can see now it's successful. There's no error, but the response is null. And that's because we're not returning anything back. So totally expected. Let's just click that a couple more times just to make sure we have enough log data to look through. So go back to your console over here. I'm going to duplicate this really quick and go over to the CloudWatch section, which allows us, oops, what did I do there? CloudWatch. Which allows us to look at the logs for this Lambda function. Now, this is pretty standard way of debugging what's going on by taking a look at the logs. So if you're not familiar with CloudWatch and log groups and all that, make sure you are if you start using Lambda functions, because it's pretty much the only way to debug your app. So over on the left-hand side here where it says logs, you're going to click on log groups. And you're going to see here AWS Lambda demo app function. That's the name of our functions. That's the one we're going to click. So click on that. And you'll see here, I just want to give you a really quick pro tip. You see here, we have two things called log streams. Well, two entries rather. So the way this works is that every single time that you make a change to your Lambda function and you click on deploy, a new log stream is going to be spit out. So the first time I invoked my function a bunch of times. So these are the logs here in the first one, and it's sorted by date, by the way. So this one was the oldest and this one is the most recent. So if I click on this, I should see hello from Lambda all over the place. Actually, I don't, because we didn't print anything to console. We just returned it as part of the response. So that's why we don't see anything here. These are just the starts and stops of the requests. If we go back really quick and look at the second one, which is the change I just made, we can see here it looks different, right? So this is the print event line and the payload of what is inside that event. So I invoked my Lambda function like 3 or 4 times, which is why we see start and like a million times here. So let's click on this really quick. And this is, well, it looks like a whole bunch of, well, that doesn't work. Why does that not work? There we go. Oh, there's a copy button. That's better. So I want to copy this because it looks like a whole bunch of garbage that is hard to read. And I'm going to go over to a tool that I like to use called JSON. There it is, JSON Curious Concept. Just type that in Google. It's a nice little parser that you can use. It's your first result, basically. You just paste in your raw, unformatted JSON, and you click on process, and it makes it look really, really pretty, nice and formatted here. So let me just expand this out really quick. And let's take a look at what we got going on here. So a couple things stand out for me. Well, I've already looked at this, so I know what's in here, but we see here raw path, right? So one of the things that we called out right in the beginning was that we're using one Lambda function for the get person API and the create person API. These two things have very different functionalities. Get person's probably just going to query a database, return the person object back. Create person is going to insert into a database, and I don't know what it's going to return yet. Maybe that person back. But we need to have different functionality based on some kind of value that exists in this event. So raw path is a really good candidate because it tells us which API is being invoked. Another one is route key, which tells us the method in addition to the route. So both are viable here, but since I only have one route for each endpoint, I'm going to use raw path in my conditional logic a little bit later. Also, what stands out is raw query string. So this is what was passed in. If you recall through Postman, I was calling it out that it got passed in the URI, and that's what's going on here. So person ID equals person ID 123. So this is one way that you can extract the value, and well, the key and the value from the input, but not the best way. If we look a little bit further down here where it says query string parameters, we can see here person ID, which was the key that we passed in, and the corresponding value. So for the get API, this is how I want to extract my data out of the input event by using query string parameters and the corresponding person ID. Okay, so let's leave it at that. I'm actually going to take this, if I can copy this, and I would suggest you do too. Just copy this to like your notepad or something so that you can have it later. I already kind of prepared mine because we're going to be moving through different tabs here pretty regularly. So remember query string parameters, person ID 12, person ID, that's where the value is, and we're going to use raw path to do our conditional logic. So let's go back to our Lambda function now, and let's actually code this up in a way that actually makes some sense. So first of all, we want to import UUID. This is going to be something I'm going to use a little bit later to randomly generate just a hash of, well, a string really that contains some random values. So the other thing that I want to do is just assign some constants. And so let's create two constants. So get raw path, right, is equal to slash get person. Right? That's the path for the getPerson API, and create raw path, which is equal to slash create person. And we're going to use this for a conditional logic in a couple lines below here. So I'm going to leave print event because this is a pretty useful debugging thing, but for a production use case, you probably don't want to do this because it's just going to add log lines and thus cost to your bill. So you can delete that a little bit later once you're confident this is working. So what I want to do here is add a if statement, which says that if the event's raw path, right, that's what was in here, if event's raw path is equal to the value of get raw path, then basically this is our like get person path, right? Get person path. Right? And so we can do whatever we want here. We can extract the values, blah, blah, blah. We'll do that in a sec. Let me just lay out what's going on. Else, or elif, events raw path is equal to create raw path. Then this is our create person path. So we would probably want to do something like, write to database and maybe some other stuff a little bit later once we get a little bit more creative. So we're kind of setting up the scaffolding here. So what I like to do first, like right off the bat, is just print start request for get person. Let's take the same thing, copy that down to the next line, and just change that to create person, just to make this crystal clear what the flow of control is going to be. So the first thing that I said here, we'll probably call a database, right? Call database. But let's not do that for this. Let's just add an additional complexity that's not necessary for this example. Let's assume that we want to extract this ID that we're passing in to this API, and then we're going to pretend to use that to call a database. So let's do that first. Let's extract the ID. So remember, in the body here, the key that we want to extract from first is query string parameters. I'm actually going to copy that to clipboard because I'm probably going to screw up spelling it. And then from there, we want person ID, right? So let's say person ID is equal to events. And in the event object, we want query string parameters and then person ID. Remember camel case here or else you're going to screw up. And then let's just log that back and say not console log, and this is in Node.js, print person ID. So, or actually, let's make this a little bit more pretty. Received request with person ID equals to, plus person ID, right? And then we can pretend to call a database, call whatever you want to return a complete person object. But for me, I'm just going to return like a hard-coded JSON object. So let's say return, and we're going to have a JSON object. And I think we said like, first name. This is kind of what our fake schema looks like. So let's say Daniel, and then comma, last name, and G, and email is, I think I said like my email at gmail.com. That looks ugly. Gmail.com. So this is pretty much all we need for the get API right now. This should work correctly. And I'm crossing my fingers that I didn't make a typo here. Let me look really quick. This looks right to me. So let's click on deploy and let's go test this out. So we're going to go back to Postman now. And we are on the tab for get person, and we're passing in person ID 123. Let's click on send now. And there you go. So everything worked correctly. We're returning this response back. Let's just go and take a quick look at the CloudWatch logs really quick to make sure that everything went correctly. And if you click on refresh here, this is kind of what I was talking about before. We're not going to see the new log events. You have to go back to the function log group for the function. And you see now we have 3. Before we had 2. So every time we change this function, a new one's going to pop up. And you can see here it's 1831, which was just 1 minute ago for me. So click on this now, and we should see start request for get person, receive request with person ID 123. Perfect. This is working exactly how we wanted to. Now let's do the same thing for the post API. Let's go back to Postman and invoke this guy again. And just as a reminder, we're passing in this data now, and we're expecting to create a person, although we're not going to actually do that and like save it to a database. But we're just going to pass this in, generate a UUID in the Lambda, and then return it back to the caller. So let me invoke this a couple times here. So send, you can see returning null again, send, and go back to our CloudWatch logs. Now, if I just click on refresh here, we should see, so we do see that we are getting to the path for the create person API based on this text here, start request for create person. So the reason that I wanted to do this twice was that we have a different event. Like this looks the same, like the whole bunch of garbage. I suppose I learned my lesson. I should click on copy, right? This looks the same, but it's actually different. So I'm going to go back to curious concept thing over here. Let's paste this in again with the new object and expand this out. And so, like I said, this looks different, right? So we have route key. This is post now for create person, and raw path is /create person. Remember before it was /get person, and this was get. So if we look here, raw query string before had person ID and all the details that we passed into the body of the request, or I should say the header. Or query string params rather. But that's not here anymore because we are passing, since this is a post request, we need to pass in the data in the body of the request. So if we scroll down a little bit here, we look at body, which is all the way at the bottom. And we can see here this kind of jumbled mess, which is close to what I passed in from the Postman side. So we do see a JSON object, first name Daniel, last name G, and email, my email at gmail.com. So all the data is there. It's just that this is in a screwed up format because in Postman, I had new line characters and tabs. You can easily fix this if you want just by removing that. But there's an easy way to just parse out the JSON using the JSON library, which I'm going to show you pretty much right now. So let's copy this and put this back to our clipboard again as per normal. I'm actually just going to do that right now and then close out some tabs here that we don't need. So again, always good to keep this on a clipboard so that you don't lose it. Closing out some tabs really quick. So let's go back to our Lambda function and code this up in a way that makes sense for the second part, which is if it's the create flow. So as I said, we need to extract the body object out, right? So we need to say, well, we need to decode the body object too, because it's got those new lines and all that junk and backslashes and everything. So let's assign a new variable. Let's call that decoded event. And we're going to use the JSON library. Remember, have an import for JSON or else you're going to have an error here. And we're just going to say json.loads, and we're going to say events body. So this is just saying call the load s function using the JSON library, pass it the contents of body. So now decoded event is essentially a Python dictionary. So we should be able to access all those properties that we passed in. So things like in Postman over here, first name, last name, email. So what I want to do now is like extract all that. So first name is equal to decoded event. Actually, let's just do the first one. You get the point. So first name, right? So let's do what we did over here, which is, log out what we got in the request and format this. So we receive request with first name plus, and let's actually fix that, plus first name, right? That's what our log line is going to look like. And then from there, like let's pretend here, call database or something like that to save this person with these properties into our database. We're not going to do that here, obviously, but assume that we did. Now let's assume also that our API contract is that whenever you call this method, you return the ID of that person back. I just made that up, but that seems pretty reasonable to me. So let's return an object again. And let's say that's going to have a key called person ID. And the value, we're going to use the UUID library. So make sure you have at the top here, import UUID, or else you're going to have an error as well. And we're going to say UUID.UUID1, open close parenthesis. And this is just a particular format of UUID. There's like UUID 1, 2, 3, 4. And this returns an object, which isn't good for us. So we want to convert this to a string before we return this back. So let me do that here. And this looks good. Pray that I didn't make a typo. Just looking at this really quick, it looks all right. So let's click on deploy again. And let's go back to Postman now and invoke this. So what we should see is, well, nothing really in terms of log lines here, because we're just going to get a response back. But if you click on send, we should see some kind of random UUID being returned back to us. So click on send. And there you go. So we have a person ID key and our random UUID. If I click on this like a couple times, this is changing slightly, but it is changing. There you go. There's a 9 in there. Probably based by time clock or something. But anyways, you can play with this as much as you want. Let's quickly go over to CloudWatch, take a look at the log lines here just to confirm everything worked correctly again. Go back to the log group, go to the new log stream, and scroll all the way down to the bottom to the most recent one. So start request ID, there's the object, start request for create person, received request with first name Daniel, end request, we're basically done. So this showed you how to create a HTTP API using AWS Lambda. If you enjoyed this video, check out the other ones I have on API Gateway. And as always, if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.